We've all encountered them. People who are absolutely convinced of their own expertise despite clear evidence to the contrary. The colleague who confidently derails meetings with misguided suggestions. The family member who becomes an instant expert after watching a single documentary. The internet commenter who argues with actual professionals, completely certain they know better. You've seen it, you've experienced it, and maybe, just maybe, you've been that person yourself. But here's what nobody wants to admit. The people who are most confident in their abilities are often the least competent at them, and the people who actually know what they're talking about, they're usually full of doubt. This isn't just a personality quirk or bad behaviour, it's a psychological phenomenon so predictable that scientists gave it a name, the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And the most terrifying part, the people most trapped by it have no idea they're trapped at all. Today we're diving deep into one of the most important psychological discoveries of the last 25 years, why incompetent people are so confident, why experts doubt themselves, and how this cognitive bias is literally reshaping our society. We'll explore the fascinating origins of this effect, the psychological mechanisms that make it so powerful, and most crucially, how to recognize when you're falling into this trap yourself. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand why confidence and competence are often inversely related, how our digital age has turned this psychological quirk into a societal crisis, and the specific strategies you can use to calibrate your confidence with your actual abilities. I've spent years studying cognitive biases, metacognition, and the psychology of expertise, and what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you evaluate not just others, but your own knowledge and abilities. But first, let me tell you a story that perfectly illustrates just how dangerous this effect can be, and why understanding it might be one of the most important things you ever learn about human psychology. In 1999, social psychologists David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger discovered something that explains everything from why your uncle thinks he understands economics after reading one article, to why some of the loudest voices on social media have the least actual knowledge. As Dunning himself put it, the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is you don't know you're a member of the Dunning-Kruger Club. This isn't just academic theory. This cognitive bias is actively shaping elections, medical decisions, and the fabric of informed discourse in our society. The discovery of the Dunning-Kruger effect began with one of the most bizarre bank robberies in criminal history. In 1995, MacArthur Wheeler walked into two Pittsburgh banks in broad daylight with no disguise, robbed them, and walked out. When arrested later that night, Wheeler was genuinely shocked to learn that surveillance cameras had captured his image. "But I wore the juice," he protested to police. Wheeler had covered his face with lemon juice, believing it would make him invisible to security cameras based on his understanding that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink. This wasn't a mentally ill person or someone on drugs. This was a man so confident in his flawed logic that he staked his freedom on it. This remarkable case caught the attention of psychologist David Dunning, who was fascinated by Wheeler's profound misunderstanding and complete confidence in his flawed reasoning. It led Dunning to question, how could someone be so incompetent that they didn't even realize their incompetence? He partnered with graduate student Dunning-Kruger to investigate this phenomenon systematically. In their seminal 1999 study, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, they assessed participants on humour grammar and logical reasoning skills. After each test, participants were asked to estimate how well they performed compared to others. The results were striking and consistent across all domains. Those who scored in the bottom quartile dramatically overestimated their performance, believing they outperformed 62% of their peers when they had actually only outperformed 12%. Meanwhile, top performers consistently underestimated their relative performance. As Dunning observed, if you're incompetent, you can't know you're incompetent. The skills you need to produce a right answer are exactly the skills you need to recognize what a right answer is. This creates what researchers call a double burden of incompetence. Not only do people lack the skills to perform well, but they also lack the metacognitive ability to recognize their deficiency. But here's what makes this discovery so profound. It revealed that overconfidence isn't just arrogance or stubbornness. It's a predictable consequence of how human cognition works. When we don't know enough to know what we don't know, we naturally assume we know enough. The effect was so robust that it appeared in every domain they tested. Whether it was understanding humour grammar rules or logical reasoning, the pattern held the least skilled were the most confident, while the most skilled were the most uncertain about their relative performance. Wheeler's lemon juice robbery wasn't just a bizarre crime, it was a perfect illustration of a fundamental flaw in human psychology. When we lack expertise in a domain, we also lack the ability to recognise expertise, including the absence of it in ourselves. This creates a cognitive blind spot so profound that incompetence becomes invisible to those who possess it. At its core, the Dunning-Kruger effect stems from what philosophers call the unknown unknowns problem, but the psychology behind it is far more complex than most people realise. The effect operates through several psychological mechanisms that work together to create an almost impenetrable shield against self-awareness. First is the metacognitive deficiency. When we venture into unfamiliar territory, we lack awareness of the full scope of knowledge or skills required. As Dunning explains, the skills you need to produce the right answer are exactly the same skills you need to evaluate if an answer is right. Think about this. If you don't understand economics, you also can't evaluate whether someone else's economic argument is sound. If you lack medical knowledge, you can't distinguish between good and bad medical advice. The very incompetence that leads to poor performance also prevents recognition of that poor performance. This creates what researchers call a double curse. You're wrong, and you're wrong about being wrong. It's like being lost but not knowing you're lost, so you don't even think to ask for directions. Second is the confirmation bias amplification. Once we form a belief about our abilities, we selectively attend to information that supports that belief while discounting contradictory evidence. A novice who believes they're skilled will remember their successes, attribute failures to external factors, and interpret ambiguous feedback positively. I've seen this in professional settings countless times. The employee who gives a poor presentation but focuses on the one piece of positive feedback while dismissing multiple suggestions for improvement. They're not being dishonest. Their brain is literally filtering information to maintain their self-concept. Third is what psychologists call the above-average effect, or illusory superiority. Even when trying to be objective, humans struggle to evaluate themselves without reference points. In the absence of clear feedback or comparison, we tend to rate ourselves above average. Studies consistently show that 95% of managers believe they perform in the top 50% of their peer group, a statistical impossibility. But here's where it gets really interesting. The effect isn't uniform across the competence spectrum. Rather than a simple inverse relationship between confidence and ability, researchers have identified what's called the Dunning-Kruger curve, a characteristic pattern that maps the journey from novice to expert. The journey begins at what some call Mount Stupid, the peak of confidence experienced by absolute beginners who have gained just enough knowledge to feel informed but lack awareness of the vast terrain they haven't explored. As Mark Twain observed, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so." After this initial peak comes the valley of despair, when continued learning reveals the true scope of the domain, causing confidence to plummet. This is where many people give up, unable to reconcile their self-image with the newly discovered reality of their limitations. Those who persevere begin the gradual climb up the slope of enlightenment, where competence and confidence slowly increase together through dedicated practice and learning. They eventually reach the plateau of sustainability, where high competence is matched with appropriately calibrated confidence. What's particularly fascinating is how true experts often exhibit slight underconfidence relative to their actual abilities. This expert's uncertainty stems from their comprehensive understanding of complexity and nuance within their field. They're acutely aware of the boundaries of their knowledge and the vastness of what remains unknown. The Dunning-Kruger effect reveals a cruel irony. The less you know, the more confident you feel, while the more you actually know, the more you realize how much you don't know. This isn't a character flaw. It's a feature of how human cognition processes expertise and uncertainty. While most experimental evidence comes from laboratory settings, the Dunning-Kruger effect extends far beyond academic skills, permeating virtually every domain of human endeavour, often with dangerous consequences. In healthcare, this effect can literally be life-threatening. Medical students with the lowest skill levels often overrate their clinical abilities, potentially leading to dangerous overconfidence in clinical decision-making. One study found that doctors who were most confident about their diagnoses were not more accurate than their peers. but they were significantly less likely to consult references or seek second opinions. Think about the implications. The doctors who most need additional input are the least likely to seek it, while the most competent doctors are constantly second-guessing themselves. This isn't just about individual patient care, it's about how medical errors propagate through healthcare systems. In professional settings, the effect manifests as the unskilled and unaware employee who consistently overrates their performance and contribution. These individuals often resist feedback, show limited professional growth, and create interpersonal conflicts. They're not just underperforming, they're actively undermining team dynamics because they can't see their own deficiencies. I've consulted with organizations where entire departments were paralyzed by individuals who combined low competence with high confidence. They dominated meetings, dismissed expert input, and made decisions based on their inflated self-assessment. The most tragic part? They genuinely believed they were the highest performers. In politics, the effect helps explain why some of the most virulent voices on complex policy issues often demonstrate the least nuanced understanding. Those with rudimentary knowledge of economics, climate science, or international relations may express absolute certainty in their positions, while experts in these fields typically acknowledge the limitations and uncertainties inherent in their domains. As Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it, one of the great challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know you're wrong. This captures how the effect operates in public discourse, where confident ignorance often drowns out careful expertise. But our digital age has created a perfect storm for the Dunning-Kruger effect. Social media platforms allow individuals with minimal expertise to broadcast their opinions to wide audiences with the same apparent authority as established experts. This democratization of voice, while valuable in many ways, has also created what researchers call an expertise crisis, a flattening of the perceived difference between novice and expert opinions. The structure of social media platforms further compounds the problem by rewarding confident assertions over nuanced expertise. Algorithms tend to promote content that generates engagement, which often means strong, unequivocal statements rather than careful, qualified analyses. This creates an environment where the loudest, most confident voices gain prominence regardless of actual expertise. Filter bubbles and echo chambers exacerbate these tendencies by shielding individuals from contradictory information that might challenge their perceived expertise. When surrounded only by those who share similar perspectives or levels of understanding, there are few opportunities to recognize one's limitations. The internet has also created what researchers call knowledge fragmentation, the acquisition of discrete facts without the conceptual frameworks needed to integrate them meaningfully. This fragmented knowledge creates the sensation of understanding without its substance. Reading an article about vaccines doesn't make you an immunologist, but it can create the illusion of expertise sufficient to challenge actual medical professionals. We saw this phenomenon reach dangerous levels during COVID-19, where doctors, engineers, and lawyers, people with demonstrated analytical abilities in their own fields, began confidently sharing debunked theories about vaccines and treatments in domains where they had no expertise. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just a psychological curiosity, it's a social force that shapes elections, medical decisions, and public discourse. In an age where everyone has a platform, the difference between confidence and competence has never been more important to recognize. The manifestation of the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't uniform across cultures, and understanding these differences reveals something profound about how society itself can either amplify or mitigate this cognitive bias. In Western, particularly American culture, self-promotion and confidence are highly valued. Children are raised to believe in themselves and their potential, creating fertile ground for overestimation of abilities. The American ethos of individual achievement and potential may inadvertently amplify the Dunning-Kruger effect by encouraging positive self-assessment regardless of objective performance. Think about how we raise children in the West. Every child gets a trophy, everyone is told they're special, and confidence is treated as inherently valuable. While this has positive intentions, it can create adults who have never learned to accurately calibrate their self-assessment with their actual abilities. By contrast, many East Asian cultures emphasize humility, self-improvement, and awareness of one's limitations. Studies have found that Japanese students typically rate themselves below average on many dimensions, the opposite of the above-average effect commonly observed in Western samples. This cultural tendency towards self-criticism may actually mitigate the Dunning-Kruger effect by encouraging more conservative self-assessments. As Confucius wisely noted, real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Cultures that embed this philosophy into their educational and social systems may naturally cultivate the metacognitive awareness that helps prevent the Dunning-Kruger effect from taking hold. Collectivist versus individualistic societal orientations also impact how the effect manifests. In more collectivist societies, where group harmony and interdependence are prioritized, individuals may be more receptive to feedback from others and less likely to maintain inflated self-assessments that contradict group consensus. However, no culture is immune to the basic cognitive limitations that underlie the effect. The fundamental challenge of not knowing what you don't know transcends cultural boundaries, even if its expression varies across different societies. What's particularly interesting is how cultural values around expertise and authority influence the effect's social consequences. In cultures with strong respect for expertise and hierarchy, overconfident novices may have less social impact. But in cultures that celebrate disruption and questioning authority, the Dunning-Kruger effect can have more pronounced societal consequences. The internet has also created a global culture that often flattens these traditional cultural differences. Online, anyone can present themselves as an expert, and cultural markers of humility or deference may be less visible or valued. Culture acts as either an amplifier or a buffer for the Dunning-Kruger effect. Societies that celebrate confidence may inadvertently create more overconfident incompetence, while cultures that emphasize humility and continuous learning may better protect against this cognitive bias. Understanding this cultural dimension helps us see why the effect has become so pronounced in our current global, digitally connected society. While the Dunning-Kruger effect highlights the dangers of overconfidence, the solution isn't to eliminate confidence altogether, it's to calibrate it properly with actual ability. Confidence itself isn't inherently problematic. In fact, a certain degree of self-belief is essential for motivation, perseverance, and achievement. Research in performance psychology has consistently shown that optimal performance typically requires a moderate level of confidence, enough to motivate action and persistence, but not so much that it prevents recognition of mistakes or areas for improvement. The problem arises when confidence is drastically misaligned with actual ability. This misalignment can lead to poor decision-making, resistance to learning, and interpersonal conflicts. However, appropriate confidence based on realistic self-assessment can be highly adaptive and contribute to success. Interestingly, studies suggest that slightly overestimating one's abilities by a small margin may actually be beneficial in some contexts. This mild, positive illusion can increase motivation, help overcome initial challenges, and lead to greater persistence in the face of setbacks. The key distinction is between slight overconfidence that drives effort versus the dramatic overestimation characteristic of the Dunning-Kruger effect. As psychologist Albert Bandura noted, people who have a sense of self-efficacy bounce back from failures. They approach things in terms of how to handle them, rather than worrying about what can go wrong. This healthy confidence differs fundamentally from the unfounded certainty of those caught in the Dunning-Kruger trap. The challenge then is not to eliminate confidence, but to cultivate what psychologists call epistemic humility alongside self-efficacy. This balanced approach acknowledges both our capabilities and our limitations. It's the difference between saying I'm good at this versus I know everything about this. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of the Dunning-Kruger effect is recognizing it in ourselves. By its very nature, the effect blinds us to our own incompetence, creating a stubborn cognitive blind spot that resists self-awareness. The first step toward breaking free from this cycle is accepting our universal vulnerability to this bias. No one, regardless of intelligence or education, is immune to overestimating their abilities in domains where they lack expertise. As intellectual historian Robert Burton writes, the feeling of knowing is not a reliable guide to whether or not you actually know something. Practical strategies for counteracting the effect begin with actively soliciting feedback from others, particularly experts in the relevant domain. External assessment provides the objective perspective that self-assessment often lacks. However, this requires genuine openness to criticism and a willingness to temporarily suspend defensive reactions. Deliberate practice with specific focus on areas of weakness can also help align perceived and actual ability. This practice must include clear, immediate feedback on performance to calibrate self-assessment. Without this feedback loop, practice alone may actually reinforce overconfidence rather than correct it. Cultivating metacognitive awareness, thinking about your thinking, serves as another powerful antidote. Regular reflection on the limits of your knowledge and consciously considering alternative perspectives helps develop the habit of questioning initial certainty. The goal isn't to become paralyzed by self-doubt, but to develop what we might call confident humility, the ability to act decisively while remaining open to the possibility that we might be wrong. This calibration between confidence and competence is perhaps the most important skill for navigating our complex, rapidly changing world. The journey through the Dunning-Kruger Effect reveals a fundamental paradox of human knowledge. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. As our circle of knowledge expands, so too does our perimeter of contact with the unknown. This paradox creates the counterintuitive trajectory we've explored, from the unearned confidence of novices to the calibrated uncertainty of experts. It explains why true mastery is often marked not by absolute certainty, but by comfort with complexity, nuance, and the limits of current understanding. Richard Feynman, one of history's greatest physicists, captured this beautifully. "I believe that a scientist looking at non-scientific problems is just as dumb as the next guy." This humility from a Nobel Prize winner illustrates what the Dunning-Kruger effect teaches us, that wisdom begins not with certainty but with the recognition of how much we have yet to learn. Understanding this effect offers us a powerful lens for self-reflection and intellectual growth. It reminds us that the path to genuine knowledge begins with recognizing our limitations and embracing the discomfort of uncertainty. It encourages us to cultivate both the confidence to act and the humility to learn. As we navigate an increasingly complex world filled with confident voices offering simplified certainties, awareness of this cognitive bias becomes ever more valuable. It helps us distinguish between hollow confidence and earned expertise, both in ourselves and in others. Perhaps most importantly, understanding the Dunning-Kruger effect inspires a more compassionate view of human error. When we recognize that overconfidence often stems not from arrogance, but from the very structure of knowledge acquisition, we can approach disagreements with greater patience and intellectual charity. The next time you find yourself absolutely certain about something outside your area of expertise, remember MacArthur Wheeler and his lemon juice. Ask yourself, what evidence would change my mind? What might I be missing? Who has more expertise than I do in this domain? These aren't signs of weakness, they're signs of intellectual maturity. In a world that often rewards loud confidence over quiet competence, choosing to say "I don't know" or "I might be wrong" becomes a radical act of intellectual courage. The most dangerous people aren't those who know they don't know. They're those who don't know that they don't know. By acknowledging our susceptibility to the Dunning-Kruger effect, we take the first step toward overcoming it. As Socrates wisely observed, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. This isn't pessimism. It's the foundation of all genuine learning and the antidote to the overconfidence that blinds us to our own limitations. The Dunning-Kruger effect teaches us that intellectual humility isn't just a virtue, it's a survival skill. In a world where overconfident incompetence can spread faster than careful expertise, the ability to recognize the limits of our own knowledge becomes one of the most important capabilities we can develop. I've created a deep exploration of how the Dunning-Kruger effect operates in romantic relationships, why people who are terrible at love are often the most confident about their romantic abilities, and how developing intellectual humility can revolutionize your approach to dating and long-term partnership. You'll discover why the most successful people in love are often those who remain curious rather than certain, how to recognize when you're in the overconfidence trap in relationships, and the specific practices that help calibrate your romantic confidence with your actual relationship skills. Click the video appearing on screen now to explore how the same psychological principles that make people overestimate their abilities also make them overestimate their understanding of love, and how intellectual humility can become your secret weapon for authentic connection. Remember, at Psyche Depth, we explore how fundamental psychological principles shape every aspect of human experience. Subscribe if you're ready to continue this journey into the depths of consciousness, where understanding your own cognitive biases becomes the foundation for understanding everything else.